Hi, welcome back to my channel. This is going to be a two-part video. It is The Girl from Summerhayes and The Secret from Summerhayes by Merryn Allingham. Now, I have these for a blog tour mid-January somewhere. I'm not sure exactly when because I'm doing a host of videos at the same time. So we're going to talk about each story separately. I'll try to take 3 or 4 minutes per review. Now, in our first In our first review, we have our character, and her name is Elizabeth, and it's 1914 England, and it's the time when a young girl marries well. That is the goal for young women, pretty much in this generation of young ladies in this part of Sussex countryside in the UK. Now, Summerhayes is a place that is a beautiful place, and 19-year-old Elizabeth Summer should be really happy. Unfortunately, she's not. And she had her season in London, and she actually received 2 proposals that she turned down. And so now she's back at home, and she's resolved to become an old maid. She just wants to do her art, and her art will carry her forever. And she's pretty content with that. She has no qualms about that decision that she's made with her life. However, this does not sit well with her father. Her father wants her to marry, and he wants her to marry well. Along the way, however, Elizabeth's father is building what's called I think it's called a butterfly garden. And he has an architect or a team of architects working on this garden. And there's an architect apprentice, and his name is Aidan. And Elizabeth is drawn to him. However, he's a tradesman, and she needs to marry a titled somebody of the peerage. Now, as we learn about her family, her father was not of the peerage. He made his money kind of after the fact. I'm just going to use quotations for that. But now, because of his financial status, Elizabeth could afford to marry someone, higher up. However, as the story progresses, we see the friction that exists between Elizabeth and her father, especially as she draws closer and closer to Aidan. This isn't working well for Elizabeth, for her father, and then while this is happening, World War I is on the brink, okay? Now, Elizabeth's maid is about to marry, and the man that she marries, I believe he's the chauffeur, she knows that he will have to go off to war. Aidan may have to go off to war. Others may have to go off to war. So what does her father try to do? He tries to marry her off. In fact, the man that he chooses for Elizabeth is well old enough to be her father. He's a widower with no children, but a widower nonetheless. And her father says he will be good to you, he will be kind to you, and he is the perfect man for you. But Elizabeth has no desire to marry at all, especially a man old enough to be her father. That is the historical family story that is told in the first book in this series by Merryn Allingham, The Girl from Summerhayes. And that girl, obviously, is Elizabeth. Now, remember I said I was going to only spend a few minutes per book? Okay, so if I'm only going to spend a few minutes per book, then we have to go on to book number 2, which I believe is The Secret of Summerhayes. And so as we move on to the second part of this video, we have The Secret of Summerhayes. Again, it's by Merryn Allingham. And in book 1, we had Elizabeth in 1914 at the cusp of World War I. Well, now we have 1944, and now we're looking at the beginning stages of World War II. Now, in this book, we have Bethany Merryn, who has taken on a job as companion to an older lady. Who is the older lady? The older lady, her name is Alice Summer. Now, if you're following me in this video, you'll know that our young girl in book 1 was Elizabeth Summer, who was 19 years old, and she was in love with Aidan. But this book talks about Alice Summer. Well, who is Alice Summer? Someone I have not yet mentioned. Alice is Elizabeth's mother. Now, as of this book taking place 30 years later, Alice is an older woman, but she's also an older woman in failing health. And now she has a hired person that is assisting her as a companion. At the same time, the army or the military has taken residence in the Summerhayes residence. So Alice is kind of sequestered in a small apartment in this home that Elizabeth grew up in, and now the military is living there, living on the estate that is falling apart. Alice's husband has passed away. We know that Elizabeth isn't there. For if you read the first book in the series, Elizabeth had a brother, Alice had a son. He's no longer there, and all we have is Alice living in an apartment on the estate that's falling apart, and the army or the military or whoever soldiers are living there as well. Not living there by invitation, by no means, but that's what they did. They took whatever residences they wanted to take. Well, there's a history there. And the history involves this garden, that butterfly garden that Elizabeth's father was building back in 1914. That history starts to affect Alice because she starts receiving letters, and letters that are directed to her that just might bring her reconciliation with Elizabeth. Meanwhile, there is a man there who is working. He's a soldier. I think he's a lieutenant, And during the times that he's billeted at her house, because that's what soldiers did, they billeted. They took over residences. And he was kind of like a secretary in his role, as he was a lieutenant, but his role was more like a secretary. So whatever free time he had, he directed it towards that garden that never got completed back in 1914. There's a mystery here. There's a mystery here. Okay? The mystery goes back to Elizabeth's mother, Alice, that garden, that lieutenant, and the letters, those anonymous letters that Alice suddenly started receiving. Then there's one more layer to this that I want to share with you. And that other layer is Alice seems to be losing her mind. And she is distraught over something that she is trying to bring peace to. And those anonymous letters play into that. So even though it's a historical fiction, a women's fiction type of a book, or historical fiction, whatever, there's a mystery there. And I just want to give it to you in layers. And I hope that I did a good enough job so that you can try to see how World War I affected what happened back in Elizabeth's day in 1914. But now it's 1944. And we see the effects of the war and how it plays into what's going on in Alice's life and in those letters and in that lieutenant. Remember that lieutenant. So that's it. The Secret of Summerhayes, which followed The Girl of Summerhayes. Both by Merryn Allingham. These are reprints. They came out in 2017 by HarperCollins, and now they're being re-released by Book and Shore in January, and that's when you'll see this video. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.